Well, good morning. I hope everyone enjoyed the program yesterday, and I'm very excited to proceed with the program today because although we had to spend some time on the grim nature of the problem, today will be about the positive, about how technology can be used in positive ways to impact trafficking. And we're going to start with panel 2 this morning, followed by panel 3 and panel 4, and they will cover the ways that technology can be used in prevention, protection, and prosecution, as well as opportunities to engage on technology in policy and partnerships. I was told late last night that yesterday this conference was the #1 trending topic on Twitter of Austria, which I think is a testament to the tremendous interest in the public on this topic and the great support for trying to figure out ways forward. As Princess Eugenie said yesterday, we are the advance guard, and this conference is about advancing the response of all the participating states in a positive way on ending trafficking. One technical note before we begin. In some of the programs, we noted that the side event on ICT tools to improve proactive identification was noted to begin at 1300. That is incorrect. The first 3 side events all begin at 1330. And the 4th begins at 1345 during the lunch break. So once again, all 3 of the first side events begin at 1330. And we hope you can choose your favorite and join us after you grab some lunch today. So with that, I will turn it over to the moderator for our second panel of this conference, Mr. Phil Bennett. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Val, and welcome, everybody. My name is Phil Bennett, and I'm a strategic technology advisor, and I'm delighted to be moderating the second panel at this event today. As was mentioned, yesterday was focused on a lot of the negative aspects of technology, and today we are switching gear and looking at the positive aspects. Today's panel, this panel, is focused on 2 very specific aspects of our fight against human trafficking. First of all, we'll be looking at the ways in which technology is used by organizations to prevent human trafficking, and we'll also be looking at the way that technology is used by organizations to protect survivors. And I think those 2, what seem like very different themes, are indeed connected. I think many of us would recognize that sadly, many survivors who have escaped a situation are still left, many of them with the same vulnerabilities that led them to be trafficked and exploited in the first place. And so I think there is always a prevention element to organizations who work in protection as well. I am delighted to say we have 4 excellent panelists to present to us today about how their organizations are successfully using technology. And they're very much focused on action. These are technologies which are being used right now. And I have challenged the panelists to be bold in their recommendations today and to be clear about those. And towards the end of the session, I will be attempting to sum up those recommendations for us. During the session, I would encourage you to think about several aspects as you listen to the panelists and their testimonies. I think something that was mentioned yesterday was about, first of all, the scale of the challenge that we have. And we saw presentations yesterday that told us how much of activities related to trafficking have moved to the digital sector and how large this has become. You will hear some interesting technical innovations, but I would encourage you also to listen out for the operating models of the organizations who are using technology, as I think the operating models are at least as important as the technologies themselves. It's the way in which organizations are configured to use technology, in the way in which they partner with other organizations to extract the most value and impact from the technologies that they are using. So, I'm delighted to introduce our first panelist. Andrew Wallis is the CEO of UK anti-slavery non-profit Unseen. Unseen provides safe housing and other services for survivors of trafficking, and Unseen runs the UK's modern slavery helpline. Andrew chaired a landmark Centre for Social Justice report, which has been widely acknowledged as being a catalyst for the development of the United Kingdom's Modern Slavery Act in 2015. Andrew, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to set the context for what I'm going to talk about this morning by relating a conversation I had with a senior UK police officer actively engaged in the fight against human trafficking and modern slavery. And he admitted to me that at a national level, we still don't know the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, when it comes to understanding, let alone effectively tackling this issue. There is little or no granular level detail of understanding. So, for example, we know that Nigeria remains a top source country for the UK. But have you seen the size of Nigeria? When we ask the question, well, where precisely in Nigeria? What are the drivers? What are the push and pull factors? Which members of the population are vulnerable? And let alone what works in preventing it? We have to be honest and say we simply don't know. Or, for instance, we have historically targeted campaigns with all the available resources of the state at major hub airports to hopefully intercept either traffickers or prevent victims being exploited. Only for us to discover when we talk with victims that most of them came into the country, legally by the way, via regional airports, precisely to avoid that detection. I witness at best anecdotal evidence which is proven not to be valid, and actually let's call it what it is, wrong, being used to determine policy, strategy, legislation, and even funding with little evidence of any real impact as a result of unevidenced data. But I speak to you as someone who's committed to ending modern slavery and human trafficking. But it constantly amazes me and at times frustrates me that we, be that policing, government, NGO, or business, seem prepared at times to throw resources, time, energy, money, at problems based on the flimsiest sets of evidence, often anecdotal, with little or no empirical data, and then we wonder why we're not winning or having any real impact. However, I do believe that we can do things much more successfully, and that with technology and data, we can enhance our effectiveness and responses. I also believe passionately that this is not about pointing fingers and saying it's everyone else's fault. It's all of our fault. Rather, this is about us committing to work collaboratively to solve the complex issues. At Unseen, we have the immense privilege of working directly with survivors every day, but we would far rather that we didn't have to do this work. It's always struck me that we need to find the means to multiply our efforts to both prevent and halt exploitation in the first place, but also understand at a granular level what is going on so that we can target our limited resources effectively and measure and demonstrate real impact, and then honestly evaluate how effective we really are in ending modern slavery and human trafficking. We need tools, technology, data, partnerships, resources that enable all stakeholders, including the general public, to help us end slavery and trafficking. So I would like to walk you through 3 tools and 1 initiative that we have developed collaboratively to try and significantly move the needle on these issues, and how we're trying to create a digital ecosystem in order to answer the who, what, where, when, and why questions. First, we run the UK's Modern Slavery Helpline, opened in late 2016, developed in a highly collaborative partnership with BT and Salesforce. It runs off a Salesforce platform and allows us to capture data in a structured way and then analyze it and interrogate it. These slides are screen grabs to try and illustrate the level of data that we gather from calls, web forms, and app submissions that we receive. In 2018, the helpline took over 6,000 calls and more than 1,300 web forms and app submissions, indicating over 7,100 potential victims in the UK. This was a 65% increase in contacts from 2017. More than 12% of the calls were directly from victims, and another 50% of the calls came on behalf of victims. Through extensive grassroots partnership working undertaken by Unseen, the helpline is now established as the single point of contact for all government-led and many partner-led modern slavery-related awareness campaigns. But crucially, as it's run by an NGO, is not government-funded, victims and the public feel safe to contact us and do so. It's become the single call to action. During 2018, the helpline made over 2,200 referrals to other agencies, including the police, every single UK police force, the National Crime Agency, local authorities, gang masters, Labour and Abuse Authority, and other NGOs. As a result, we have a growing understanding of the prevalence, the heat map, and typology of modern slavery across the UK. And we use that information to inform key stakeholders so that they can respond appropriately, be that from rescuing a victim to understanding patterns and methodologies of exploitation which are constantly evolving, especially in the field of forced labor, in order to disrupt and prevent in the first place. As part of our drive to educate about the issue, help individuals spot the signs, and report more easily to the helpline, we, in partnership with BT, developed the Unseen app. As you will see from screenshots, it simply shows and details the indicators to look out for when it comes from all types of exploitation, and then allows the user to either report directly through the app or call the helpline safely. This is a great tool for the general public, but we also wanted to equip our partners, and so we worked with our National Policing Lead on modern slavery to ensure it would also help frontline police officers to both recognize the signs and identify potential victims. The app was launched in October 2018. It is endorsed by the UK's National Police Chiefs Council and is now on the phones of 11 out of the 43 police forces in the United Kingdom, and we hope to have it on every police officer's phone by next year. It's also being distributed by many companies onto their work phones, and we are working hard to persuade mobile carriers and mobile phone makers to preload it onto all phones sold in the United Kingdom. We're now working with technology companies and NGOs to make the app work globally, multilingually, GPS-enabled, so linking up with their nearest national helpline. It will make reporting and awareness raising easier and avoid the need for individuals to try and remember the myriad of different numbers depending on which country you're in or which service you need when you need to ask for help or you want to report a concern. And we're asking the technologists all the time, what's the art of the possible? How can AI and machine learning help us and enhance our response? Here's the issue we're trying to solve. Can technology help us? How can we do more together? How can we do it even better? And of course, all framed within the 5 points raised yesterday by Ambassador Richmond. Next, and building on the data that we have at the helpline, we've developed a victim case management system. Not very exciting, you may say, but we have NGOs across Europe wanting to leap forward from a paper-based or Excel spreadsheet system. This system enables us to effectively monitor the level of care survivors are receiving in order that we can improve the care that they receive. But what makes this case management system unique is that we also capture, with survivors' consent, their biographical information as it relates to their experience into and out of exploitation. We've trained staff to help debrief survivors. The truth is, as NGOs, we spend the most time with survivors. We build trust with them. Their real story slowly comes out over time, and our case management system allows us to capture that information in a structured and granular way. But what has got me and others excited the most is what happens when we anonymize and then we begin to aggregate and analyze our data. This time, by using another technology tool, Microsoft BI, the following screenshots will show you some pretty graphs, but let me pick out some highlights. We discovered within our clients, Nigerians have up to a 3 to 5 year gap between leaving exploitation and accessing support services. And we've never asked the question before, why? Where have they been? What have they been up to in that intervening period? Why does it take so long to access services? Knowing that information can help earlier intervention, recognition, ease pathways to support. It makes us ask more pertinent questions. It makes us understand the problem at a granular level. We also have learned that the education level of most victims is often nothing more than primary, which further enhances the evidence base for the critical role that education has in helping reduce vulnerability, let alone provide opportunity, particularly when it comes to women and girls. But we also have survivors that have master's degrees. That most victims of sexual exploitation, we have seen, have not been rescued. They were released by their exploiters. Yet as a sector, we put so much emphasis and narrative and resourcing around rescue that there's a 10-year age gap between the median age of female victims and male victims. We're beginning to be able to see how long they've been held in exploitation. We can slice the data by looking at types of recruitment, methodologies of control, nationality, gender, age, and can start to talk precisely about geography, routes, control, places of exploitation, typology, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why. We want to make the victim case management system work across Europe with partners. Imagine a much bigger data set. What patterns and insights might we begin to see emerge and then help other stakeholders better target resources and develop evidence-led responses? But also, how can NGOs evidence improved aftercare and support? Because we know when we do that with victims, their future life chances are rapidly improved. Finally, we recognize that we only have some of the data. We don't have the full picture. So we've brought together key data stakeholders across the UK, policing, government departments, health, NGOs, academia, and technologists to say, how do we share data? How do we understand where the gaps are? What's missing? How do we analyze data? And most importantly of all, how do we use technology to be a multiplier, to increase our effectiveness of our response so that we are informed by data and evidence so that we can make enlightened responses more effective. It's taken 8 years to build the trust relationships so that people are willing to talk about this. But we believe in the potential of collaboration, combined with a focus on what is important, informed by understanding at a granular level, that technology can be an enabler, and that a data-informed, evidence-led response to modern slavery and human trafficking can be and should be the norm. We must be far more ambitious. We must effectively collaborate so much more, as no one agency can do this by themselves or in isolation. We must allow technology to be a multiplier and an enhancer so we reach our goal, a world without slavery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. There's a lot to unpack, I think, in there. We started off by discussing the perils of the lack of data and the lack of evidence when it comes to policy decisions. And then the discussions about some of those technologies which are not being developed so much in isolation, but as part of a strategy that are connecting organizations, which I think is very powerful, this digital ecosystem, I think Andrew called it. And then the operating model again, this victim case management service, rather than dozens of NGOs building their own, having a service so that we also get best practices deployed to all those NGOs. And the byproduct of that being an interesting data set that can be used to inform our group policy and our actions to tackle slavery. Thank you very much, Andrew. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Robert Beiser. And Robert is the Executive Director of Seattle Against Slavery. Seattle Against Slavery is a USA-based nonprofit organization. After several years working at Microsoft, he left the tech world to work in the nonprofit sector as a social justice advocate. Robert is also part of the Washington State Task Force on Human Trafficking. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'll be honest, I'm not a diplomat or a government official. I'm a person who works with survivors of trafficking, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking on a daily and weekly basis. I work with law enforcement and advocates who provide services, so I'll speak rather plainly about the work that we do. This morning, I'm going to speak about technology that we've been using in the realm of sex trafficking to accomplish two main goals: to give people in a situation of exploitation the opportunity to connect with support to escape that situation, and methods to disrupt the people who are bringing harm and violence to those victims of trafficking. I'll start with describing a bit of how our software, Project Intercept, works based on the method of exploitation that occurs most commonly in sex trafficking in the United States. We have a victim, in this case I'll refer to her as Zoe, and we have a sex buyer. I'll refer to him as Jack. Zoe is either posted in an online ad by her trafficker, or, as is becoming much more common, her trafficker teaches her how to post herself so that the trafficker can manage multiple victims at the same time without ever having a direct link to their exploitation online. Jack then searches to find this ad online, contacts Zoe via text message, and is able to exploit Zoe without ever interacting with the trafficker. Now, as Melanie Thompson, speaker, expert, and survivor, said yesterday, we need to listen to survivors. So viewing this model, Seattle Against Slavery talked with a broad cross-section of survivors about what would be the most effective method to connect with these survivors who are being exploited online. And the survivor said something very simple: send us a text message. The idea that the responsibility for victims escaping trafficking lies solely with some sort of external force, and it is not a choice that should be given to those victims, simply denies the type of evidence that we see, that you can take a victim out of a trafficking situation, and if they are still at risk of violence or their families are at risk of violence, they will be pulled directly back into that trafficking situation. One needs to empower those victims to have the resources and the choice themselves to connect with services when they see it's proper and when they feel it is safe. And so instead of having Jack texting back and forth with Zoe, we developed software where advocates can directly reach out via an Azure-based text message system. Azure is a cloud-based computing system from the Microsoft Corporation. As I said before, I'm a practical expert. I work for a small nonprofit, so it required partnership with volunteers from Microsoft in order for us to develop this platform. And in our first pilot set, we saw results like this: sending a simple text message out from a survivor advocate saying, I was in the life, do you need any sort of support? Victims came back with powerful messages saying, please help me. Me and my boyfriend and his dog have been sleeping in a car for months since winter. Please help us, I'm desperate. This is a victim who had never spoken with the advocate before, had received a text message out of the blue, and yet at that moment, that victim knew that they needed help. Within 24 hours, that victim had been connected with services, had been separated from her boyfriend, who is actually her trafficker, and has not been exploited since, and it's been over a year. The advocates that we work with, when they were doing street-based outreach to those in prostitution, would typically have between 3 and 5 trafficking survivors enter in-person services in a year. In the pilot year of using text message-based outreach, over 40 trafficking survivors were able to escape their trafficking because we had given them the tools to escape trafficking themselves. But even though those victims were being removed from a trafficking situation through their own power, we saw that traffickers, encouraged to make money any way they could, would simply find more victims. And so again, we listened to the survivors, and they said this very clearly. The people driving this violence are the men who are buying sex from trafficking victims. As much as we speak of the violence coming from traffickers, the survivors we work with say that just as many times they had a gun put to their head by a man buying sex. They had a knife put to their throat by a man buying sex. The emotional violence and the physical violence they experienced was directly from the buyers, and those survivors said, do something to disrupt those buyers. And so we reached to the other side of the chain. We decided to interrupt Jack's process. And when Jack reached out to an ad online who he didn't know who it was, instead of finding a victim, he found a deterrence chatbot that survivors helped us create, along with input from law enforcement and service providers who were advocates. So instead, he found bot after bot after bot. Here's a real conversation between a sex buyer and one of our chatbots. The chatbot offers a price, and the buyer says, that sounds good. And the chatbot reveals, I'm only 15 years old and still fairly new, as long as that's chill with you. We would hope at this point, the sex buyer, who in many places is not subject to criminal scrutiny, would walk away knowing that he was buying sex from a child. But instead, this buyer responded, yeah, no worries, baby, and sent a kissy emoji. Normally, this would be where a sex buyer would buy sex from a child, but instead, because it was a chatbot, he receives a deterrence message. Soliciting is a crime. Buying sex can also cause serious harm to the victims. And he's given an opportunity to access resources because he may have a habit of buying sex from potential trafficking victims that he can't break. To date, we have disrupted over 17,000 attempts to buy sex online from decoy chatbots. And as I said, we are a small nonprofit. The resources in this room, 50 plus countries. Think about the scale that you could disrupt the money that is coming in to exploit trafficking victims in your countries. We then use the information from those buyers to retarget them on social media, Facebook and Instagram. So not only in the act of buying sex from a potential victim, but also when they are surfing online, they see ads saying, men are being arrested, or you could be supporting human trafficking, or do you need resources? We also use search ads through partnerships with Google and Bing, so that when men are searching for things like teen escorts, and this can be searched for any city in the world, they instead receive a public service announcement letting them know how they might be involved in human trafficking. And what we find is when buyers interact with a deterrence message or buyers see a response online that is not simply offering up someone to buy for sex, we can reduce the rate of those buyers by over 50%. Think about the resources that could be saved if law enforcement could focus only on the high-frequency buyers of trafficked sex in your countries. And instead, the people who are one-time sex buyers of trafficking victims would be removed completely. Technology can meet the scale of the volume of sex buying and human trafficking. We then generate data. And as was mentioned earlier, data can be a key. We find out that it's men of particular means who are typically buying sex, that it's men from the suburbs buying sex in urban areas. We have information about whether or not these men have a background in violent crimes and then can become the focus of law enforcement techniques. And we can determine scale in different cities so that national law enforcement can focus their efforts in real time in the areas of greatest need. Our set of softwares is called Freedom Signal, because we believe ultimately that given the power, survivors can create freedom for themselves. With the resources in place and the technology that we currently have available, we can disrupt sex trafficking online in any city and any country in the world. And I encourage you to follow up with all of the folks on the panel here today to find out more. And please, move beyond what we have been able to do, because you certainly have the power to do so. And victims who are being exploited today need you to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That was a powerful presentation, I think. And to me, I think this message again that began yesterday about the scale of the problem, but the fact that much of the transaction associated with trafficking is moving to the digital space has also opened up new opportunities that Robert's organization, I suppose, is taking advantage of as a preventative action in a very innovative way. And again, I would just point out and repoint out what you said, that this was done through partnerships, in this case with for-profit technology companies. Thank you. So let's now move on to our third panelist. Aditi Wanchoo is a senior manager at Adidas and is responsible for the strategic development of their modern slavery outreach program and partnership work for creating empowered workers. Her experience in corporate social responsibility includes information technology, financial services, and retail industries. Aditi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Over the next 12 to 15 minutes, and Phil, please keep me honest to the time, I'd like to give you an overview of how we are harnessing the power of digital tools and technology to protect workers and to prevent labor exploitation in our supply chain. My presentation is broadly categorized into three areas. The why. Why is investing in technology important? The how does this tool work? What are the mechanics? And finally, what are some of the success factors and recommendations for those of us in the room who are planning to pilot this with their supply chain? But before that, I'd like to draw your attention to the genesis of Adidas's human rights program. This has developed over 20 years, and it was in 1998 that we first published our workplace standards. This is really our Bible. It's our code of conduct that suppliers are bound to uphold. And 2 years after that, we published what's called our employment guidelines that are modeled around international labor law, human rights conventions, and they provide very specific guidance to suppliers on how to prevent and mitigate human rights risks, human trafficking, modern slavery, forced labor, and so on. Now, we, as you can see from the slides, we source from over 50 countries. Our sourcing is all over the world. We have hundreds of factories that employ over 1 million workers. So the supply chain is massive. And to manage risks in a supply chain like this, one of the critical things is a strong pre-screening process. Once suppliers are pre-screened and they enter our supply chain, we work very closely and directly with them to ensure training, capacity building, monitoring, auditing, so that they're in a position to uphold our workplace standards. And where we find breaches in their ability to do so, and if they're unable to act on our recommendations, we issue warning letters and also in some cases have terminated relationships. Now, over the past 20 years, either directly or through third-party NGOs, we have implemented what we call worker hotlines, grievance mechanisms, and grievance platforms. But it's really over the last few years, with the advent of new technology, that we are improving these processes, and also because workers' ownership and access to phones and internet is manifold. So why is it important to invest in technology? So the first piece, there are several reasons. I'm going to point out three. Everybody has a phone. It may not be a smartphone, but it's certainly a mobile phone. So it's embedded in, it's there. It's there for us to use. And we've used that to come up with two things. Our platform, our digital grievance platform, ensures that those who have smartphones can download the app, and those who don't can use the SMS feature. And regardless of the channel that a worker uses to engage with the factory, the treatment and management of his or her case remains unchanged. So whether you want to use the app, whether you want to use WeChat, which is an equivalent of WhatsApp in China, or SMS, it doesn't matter. The second critical thing is that because the tech interface is such, suppliers, factories are forced to respond. The accountability and the responsibility is there. And this literally shifts power into the hands of the workers. And the last piece, why investing in technology really makes sense, is oftentimes what starts off as a clarification or a concern can soon turn into a grievance or a dispute if it's not addressed on time. And a tech platform offers exactly that. It offers immediacy. So what we've done is, over the last 3 years, we first piloted this in China with a few factories at the end of December 2016. But over 3 years, we have expanded this to 6 countries, impacting close to 300,000 workers that have access to this technology. And our goal is that by the end of next year, we will enable 500,000, 500,000 workers to have access to this technology, enabling them to have a voice. I do like the sound of my voice, but okay. How does this app look like? What's the look and feel? Workers are able to, so that's what the app looks like. There are 2 things. One is that workers are able to download the app, like I said, and there are 3 ways that they can communicate with the suppliers. They can ask a question, they can report a grievance, or they can suggest something. It could be, hey, the toilets are not clean, or whatever it might be. So that's the way we pull information from workers. The app also allows us to push out information, surveys. How are you feeling? Are you happy with your workplace? Every quarter, a survey will typically ask the question, would you recommend your workplace to your friends and colleagues? It's one way of getting a pulse of the worker. How do they feel about that particular factory? Another way is newsletters, sending out information. And the third thing that you see there on the last slide is really this tool also enables digital learning. So we are able to push out modules, training modules. It could be the most recent one that we did was on worker rights around sexual harassment and abuse. So the tool allows for a range of features. And the way it works is really simple. The ticker's, okay, it's working. The worker downloads the app on the phone, anonymously sends messages. The supplier receives it on an online dashboard, and at the supplier or the factory's end, there are people who are responsible for responding to those grievances or questions that come in. Adidas, we also have access to this dashboard, so we know exactly what's going on, and we can track and monitor progress. And what we do is we tend to have regular meetings with the service provider and our suppliers to look at response times, to look at how satisfied workers are with the response that they have been given. So net-net, what we have found that over the last 3 years, almost 30,000 cases have come in through this app. Now, I want to put this in perspective. A few years ago, in our factories in China, where we were operating third-party hotlines, in a year, we used to get about 100 cases. We're now talking about 30,000 in 3 years. So you see the power of technology. What we have found is when there is factory ownership, it increases utilization massively. Factories will promote a program that they own versus something where they have to rely on a third party. Factories also see value in workers bringing issues to them directly than going outside to an NGO. What we found is that when we monitor what's happening in the factories, where there's low utilization, it immediately pinpoints that the management teams have not really taken to the technology, that they don't believe in it or whatever that might be. So low utilization means that management is not involved and their uptake is supremely important. The other thing that we've noticed is that before the app was launched, when we did a baseline survey, and after the app, after 12 months of the app being functional, the number of cases that came in was 70 times more. So what are workers telling us? What are these 30,000 cases about? You see there are a broad range. In Cambodia, for example, 70% of the workers want certain songs to be played on the PA system while they're working. Fair enough, that's their concern. In Thailand and Indonesia, they're bringing far graver and egregious issues to notice. Sexual harassment, illegal terminations, excessive overtime. So you see there are a range of issues. And what this tells us is that workers want to be heard. They want to be communicated with. Our concerns may not be theirs, but As long as they see and trust that the factory will make changes in the little things, after that is when they're willing to bring graver issues to the fore. Now, we clearly know that this is working. What are some of the factors that enable this? There are 4, in my opinion. Anonymity. Workers should be able, and they are able, to bring this without fear of retribution. The tool needs to be easy to use. It needs to be simple. Ambassador Richmond said so yesterday, and we truly believe in this. If it's too complicated, workers will lose interest. Transparency. The worker needs to know, is there a process in place for my grievances to be dealt with? What is the management system? What is the technology? The technology needs to be understood, but what is the underlying system to deal with it? When will responses, how long will it take to respond? And lastly, quick redressal. Again, this is key. Quick responses, quick resolution times ensures that the tool is successful. Recommendations. Now, for us at Adidas, this is not a desirable, this is not something good, this is a must-have. By the end of next year, all our strategic suppliers, and by that I mean where 80 or 90% of our product is manufactured, they must have these apps implemented in their factories. But for those that want to pilot with this, what I'd really like to say is 4 things. 1, technology in itself is not enough. It's a complementary tool. There are various methods of gathering information. We heard about hotlines. Andrew spoke about that. We do off-site and on-site worker interviews. You need various tools in your toolbox to be able to get a clear picture of a worker's experience. Number 2 is clarity. I cannot stress this enough. How will the data be used? When, a tool like this, it increases transparency, it increases ownership, but change management requires that everyone understands what's going to change and how. So you need to work with the suppliers and tell them exactly how this data will be used, how involved the brands are with the suppliers, what do they expect from the suppliers. So clarity in how the data is used is a must. Ownership, factory utilization, like I said, factory ownership is critical. And the other piece is continuous engagement with the suppliers. Now, when the apps were launched, some of the factories were not prepared for the number of cases that they had to deal with. So it's important to continuously engage with the factories and help them to respond to the workers, ranging from displaying empathy to investigating claims. And finally, measurement. Having a tool and not being able to measure its impact, in my opinion, is absolutely useless. If you're not able to look at what is the percentage of workers that are aware of their rights, or the percentage of workers that have downloaded the app, or the percentage that are actively using it, or the percentage that are satisfied with the way the responses are dealt with. These are all several criteria to measure the impact of the app, and that's seriously critical. And finally, I just want to leave you with 3 things. The first is, technology isn't a silver bullet. You have to understand that change takes time. So patience is critical. Second is, using technology in itself is never a solution. Solutions emerge only when the data that is gathered is used and responded to in an effective and timely fashion. And the third really is that the opportunity or the risk lies in how the tools are designed and deployed. With that, I thank you for your time and attention.
Wow, I think some of those messages really resonate. To me as a technologist, I think we know that technology is not just developed by technologists. And there's a whole community of people, including the users of the technology, and various partners who need to be engaged for technology to be successful. Again, the scale, I was shocked actually, this 500,000 deployment, or workers, I believe, actually, 500,000 workers over the next few years and 30,000 cases is an incredible measure of impact. And then the data that's being taken from that to be used as a way to make intelligent choices and policy decisions, I think is incredible. Thank you, Aditi. I just want to remind everybody that registrations are still open for interventions. I think we have 4 organisations who have made registrations. But But let's move on now to our final panelist for today. Tony Darcy is the head of corporate responsibility reporting and communications and customer relations at Nokia. Tony has more than 20 years' experience in the technology industry, including several extended periods working with sustainability-related business topics. And Tony has been Nokia's representative on the Tech Against Trafficking collaboration program most recently as well. Tony, you have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I believe it's only through dialogue and collaboration that you can move forward. I'd like to actually start just by perhaps explaining to those who don't know who Nokia are today, because many of you will have an image of Nokia from its past. We're the second largest communications network infrastructure provider in the world, with the widest portfolio. 6.1 billion mobile subscriptions run over the networks we provide to our customers. Our customers are telecom operators, enterprises, civil society, cities, etc. But I'd like to say we also, as with all large corporations, run on our supply chain, our due diligence work and our programs. Our supply chain is a complex ICT supply chain, which is very deep, and we go down to even the level of smelters in the industry, working with the conflict minerals organizations. I think we had 9,000 suppliers last year, and we have our programs in place, including the most important step in the whole program, which is follow-up and remedy of those problems. But I'd like to actually talk today on a bigger topic, which is really to understand the role of technology in the fight in human rights and in the fight against trafficking. I'd like to start with the big picture, and then I will move down into an example of a very specific solution to a problem. Technology is good. It's the people who misuse it who are bad, not the technology. We believe that technology can positively impact every aspect of an individual's life. Why? Because it gives access. In its very basic form, connectivity gives access to information, to education, to healthcare, to knowledge, and to economic opportunity. So it can also affect removing the demand for trafficking by providing access to economic opportunity. It can help achieve all 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals in one way or another. And that includes combating, disrupting, and I'd like to hear us say, defeating trafficking. If you look at the slide, we're at the early stages in technology of a massive technology disruption. And we need to understand the opportunity and potential behind that. We see 6 global megatrends. Broadband everywhere. 5G on every corner. Small cells that provide you density and capacity within 200 meters of each other. The potential of a supercomputer in your pocket is becoming more of a reality. The second thing, Internet of Things, that strangely named topic. More than 1 trillion connected sensors will come, enabling individual and societal benefits that we may not even have thought of yet. Augmented intelligence, something that will help us make decisions faster and better, with more information, more easily filtered, and make tasks more automated. But all of this also has human-machine interaction. This is not about machines being in control. Virtual and augmented reality, implantable chips, smart solutions with new voice and gesture interfaces. Then we have social and trust economics growing. What does that mean? In the time of digital currencies, it means deeply embedded security is a necessity. And finally, digitalization and the ecosystems, providing greater speed, greater efficiency, greater analytic prowess, and potential for new technologies across industry and society. But technology needs to be intelligent. It needs to be adaptive with security. 5G will bring what the technologists call imperceptible latency. What does that mean? That means instant mass information that allows, instead of analytics of past events, analytics of present event. That's important in trafficking. These changes are an opportunity to actually resolve many of the big social issues that we face, including human trafficking. You'll see 5 billion mobile internet users by 2025. 25 billion connected IoT devices, 1 trillion connected sensors, 5G everywhere, and cloud providing massive storage. These are all in the very near future. What does that mean for you as countries? It means have a digital plan. Drive to be the best you can in 5G. But there's always a but. We're not saying we can do this on our own. We're not saying because we know the technology, we know all the answers. It will only work through collaboration, as many of the panelists have said before. It's one of the reasons we co-founded Tech Against Trafficking, a coalition of tech companies that collaborate with global experts in the trafficking field. Experts from academia, from civil society, NGOs, the police forces. And what we do is look at how we can advance and scale the use of tech to prevent and disrupt human trafficking and support survivors. we have 3 key areas we look at. Mapping the tools currently being used to understand what is out there. Doing the research and looking what is there, what's useful, what's impactful, what can be taken forward. We identify technology tools with potential for scale and looking at potential collaborations between tools that complement each other. And finally, accelerating those tools. Providing support, know-how to drive the use and uptake of the most promising. But that's the big picture of how we approach. I'd like to give you one example that was just actually launched a week and a half ago by Nokia, or 2 weeks ago. If I can move forward. Scene analytics. Often technology is applied to a problem based on the technology, not on the problem. It's something we used to call a square peg and a round hole mentality. Technologists and technology experts base their solutions on a given problem or similar sets of problems. It's their DNA to solve. Scene analytics is a solution based on today's networks. Connected cameras provide a huge source of Internet of Things data. Connected cameras are everywhere. But they have the potential to be much more insightful. Video surveillance provides a deluge of video data. More video than human operators can reasonably monitor. As the cost of cameras go down, this is how video works. It's fairly straightforward. But we can change that. What if we could take all video cameras and make them sensors? 99% of video footage filmed today by security cameras is useless. It's normal people doing normal things in normal places. But we can change that with sensors. So the example, we have service stations which have a reputation for trafficking, a growing reputation. Our solution runs IoT sensors with audio signatures, key phrasing, video analytics based on machine learning. So it notices the abnormal. And that's what's uploaded and analyzed by human operators, not the 99% of useless information. Technology has a role to play in every part, but the solution needs to fit the problem. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Tony. And I think that's a powerful summary of the disruptive nature of technology. It sometimes feels to me that the next big thing becomes the current big thing all too quickly, and it does disrupt our efforts, I suppose, to use technology as well to tackle human trafficking. So thank you for that. I'm delighted to say we have 6 registered interventions. So due to that number and the remaining time, I will need to constrain you, please, to 3 minutes only. So please be brief. So first up, I'd like to invite to the floor the representative from Ukraine.
Thank you. Natalia Fedorovich, Deputy Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine. The Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine is a national coordinator in the field of combating human trafficking, which provides for the establishment of the status of a person who became a victim of trafficking in human being. Among 756 persons for whom this status was established by the ministry, 30% were recruited via the internet, social networks, fake vacancy announcement, etc. Due to the difficult economic and social situation in Ukraine, our citizens seek employment abroad, having little understanding for the laws of the foreign states and the rules for official employment in the country of destination. Most often Ukrainians go to work to Poland, Russia, the Czech Republic, Italy, and other countries where the traffickers exploit them for labor and sexual purposes. Most of the vacancies are placed online. One of the burning issues is the problem of employment of Ukrainians who became victims of trafficking in human beings and forced to take part in criminal activities connected with distribution and production of narcotic substances on the territory of Russian Federation, the Kingdom of Thailand, the Republic of Malaysia, and other countries. Out of the 314 citizens of Ukraine serving sentences in the Russian Federation, only 15 have been returned to Ukraine. We once again call the international community to develop a mechanism for transnational prevention of the employment of citizens in illegal activities on the territory for foreign states. The Ministry of Social Policy, with the support from international partners, developed two e-courses for training the frontline specialists who work in the area of CTHB. We consider that information policy programs and strategies to reduce the number of cases of human trafficking, especially trafficking in children, have to further developed. The establishment of the secure information environment is not only foundation for reduction to CTSB cases, but also a step forward to the development of a responsible, informed, and tolerant society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your insights on that. Next up is our representative from Uzbekistan. You have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, on behalf of the delegation of Uzbekistan, to greet all those present here today and to thank the organizers and the Secretariat of the OSCE for having invited us to take part in today's conference. Unfortunately, today, the problem of slavery and human trafficking is a burning issue of the day throughout the world. Uzbekistan has also been affected by it. Today, at the initiative of the president, we have brought reforms in all spheres of life being undertaken, including in law enforcement. Since our independence, we have a successful policy implemented in this area at the legislative and institutional level, at the awareness raising and institutional levels as well. In line with the current strategy on the 5 priorities for development in Uzbekistan, 17 to 2020, we are going to update the system in combating crime and prevention, including in the area of human trafficking. In Uzbekistan, we have seen and analyzing our criminal cases that we have labor and sex exploitation. We're also a country of origin for these crimes. The potential victims are recruited in our country and are then exploited abroad. Some of these are CIS countries. The main channels for trafficking that our citizens become victims of are the Arab Emirates, Thailand, and Turkey, and Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Russia, and Azerbaijan as well. The Ministry of Internal Affairs conducts monitoring of the internet in order to look at cases where illegal information is published on it. Also, prevention measures are being taken to raise awareness amongst the population about the risks of sex and labor exploitation. We use the mass media. And today, nationally, we have a hotline as well as an internet site of the State Interagency Commission on Combating Human Trafficking. We work very actively with NGOs as well. We would like to suggest the following recommendations. In order for timely investigation and for human trafficking and to assist people, we need to have a database of non-governmental organizations, ministries, and agencies that all provide assistance to the victims of human trafficking, and one single hotline in the ministries and agencies that deal with these issues. To do this, we need to work with international organizations. We need to have unified standards on preventing human trafficking, to identify them, and to look for potential victims. We need to amend the standards that are used to provide social assistance to victims of trafficking. Also, with regard to providing assistance to foreigners, we also need to focus on the victims who come from neighboring countries. We need to step up interagency and international cooperation to cut off the financial channels that feed human trafficking. We need to look at the routes that migrants used, where women and children are the most vulnerable to this scourge. In conclusion, I would like to note that Uzbekistan is prepared to continuing to establish close contacts with all countries and international organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention, and also your recommendations related to transnational cooperation and standards. Next, we have an intervention from a non-profit organization, the Smile of the Child. Representative, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Smile of the Child is the largest civil society organization in Greece in the field of childcare and child protection. The link is obvious between the combat against human trafficking and children going missing. The Smile of the Child is in Greece, among other things, the national operator of the European hotline for missing children 116000, working closely together with all relevant authorities and police. It disposes of professional call centers on a 24/7 basis. The hotline yearly receives around 10,000 calls and is instrumental in well over 100 cases of children going missing every year in Greece. In all this, technology plays an important role, as some examples may illustrate. One, ECAS stands for the European Child Alert Automated System, initiated by the Smile the Child in 2010 with EU support, and by which alerts and reported information on missing children cases are distributed automatically and within less than 20 minutes over more than 60 relevant actors, authorities, and other instances in the specific format required by each one of them. Two, our organization is an active member of the Global Missing Children's Network, through which a secure and private platform was developed, opening the way to cross-border search of missing children by means of facial recognition, using tools which scan into a multitude of internet sources, including the dark net. Three, we are currently in the process of implementing the cyber tip line tool developed by our US partner, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The tool systemizes and processes anonymous tips on online enticement of children for sexual acts, child pornography, child sex trafficking, etc. Four, in recent years, a significant number of cases of child disappearance are migration-related. We have therefore established capacity to respond to incoming calls in Arabic, Farsi, and occasionally other languages. But we have also developed a communication technology-driven arrangement through which operators of an Arab peer organization can instantly be brought into a triangular remote modus conversation. 5, another development which is currently being started up is the introduction of a chat service within the hot helpline environment. This was already highlighted before by one of the speakers, how important the chat service is. These illustrations lead to some conclusions. The first conclusion is that contemporary technology requirements are complex and sophisticated and imply that efforts to develop and implement tools be pooled and shared. No organization can keep up with these requirements by itself. So working in close cooperation with relevant government instances, the IT sector and credible umbrella organizations is key to the effectiveness for us in the civil society sector. The second conclusion is that there is a clear cross-border dimension, so technological solutions must be internationally interlinked and compatible as well. For civil society organizations, this essentially implies a need to reach out to peer organizations beyond their national borders. And finally, one must remain mindful of the limitations of technological input as well. Empathy, adequate response to psychological trauma, etc. Conclusion, the human factor will always remain important and irreplaceable. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for the update, especially from the helpline in Greece. It's excellent, thank you. Next up, we have an intervention from Holy See. Delegate from Holy See, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The delegation of the Holy See would like to thank the the speakers of this panel for your important messages and presentations. The Catholic Church recognizes the positive potential of technology, especially new technology, but encourages making a responsible, supportive and broad use of it to improve the conditions of life of those suffering in situations of precariousness and insecurity. At the same time, it deplores any distorted and manipulative use of technology. Among the institutions of the Catholic Church, there are various entities engaged in raising awareness, promoting education, and enhancing coordination in the objective of combating the trafficking in human beings. These entities promote activities that, through the innovative use of technology, connect at both the national and international levels programs for the protection of victims within the sphere of entrepreneurship, education, and communication. Their actions have, in fact, a twofold objective. On one hand, they seek the reintegration into society of those who have been victims of exploitation and trafficking and a just labor market. On the other hand, they promote increased awareness of the need to disseminate information on trafficking, as well as on its tragic consequences. To these ends, such actors develop awareness-raising and prevention activities. In fact, the pastoral orientations on human trafficking, to which I referred yesterday, encourage greater information sharing in combating this scourge. And I quote, "States should share relevant information on human trafficking with other states and develop joint responses in terms of prevention, protection, and prosecution. Greater cooperation is needed, as well as the provision of technical and other assistance to countries, all along the human trafficking routes. In order to be effective, cooperation and coordination must also involve civil society, faith-based organizations, and religious leaders, as well as the business sector and media, when possible and practicable. Even the involvement of the victims themselves can be of great assistance, as they are often able to provide crucial information on criminal networks. His Holiness Pope Francis makes direct use of the means that technology increasingly makes available so as to combat the obscenity of human trafficking. One of the most recent examples of this is the video published on February 2nd, 2019 on the website, where Pope Francis reminds us that, and I quote, "Although we try to ignore it. Slavery is not something from other times. Faced with this tragic reality, no one can wash their hands of it without being in some way an accomplice to this crime against humanity. We cannot ignore the fact that there is as much slavery in the world today as there was before, or perhaps more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insights. Next, we have a representative from the International Centre for Migration Policy and Development. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank all the panelists for a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. And I think we very much welcome the opportunity to talk about how to specifically prevent human trafficking using technology. We've just completed a large-scale research study on trafficking in the context of migration routes to Europe and looking at resilience and vulnerability factors. The full study is available to download on ICMPD's website. When the panelists were discussing the importance of evidence and data, I was thinking about the research that we have and really the importance, and I'd like to second what was said by the representative of the Smile of the Child and also the presentation by Robert Beiser about the need to really talk to the people about their experiences and see what their needs are rather than coming from the outside and trying to impose something. For our research, we interviewed people who were traveling along migration routes, and we tried to understand what their experiences were and which factors of resilience allowed them to protect themselves in that context from trafficking and abuse. And we found definitely that digital literacy, owning a smartphone, and being able to access social media, mobile apps, and other online sources was extremely important for people's resilience to human trafficking and to other forms of abuse. It allowed them to plan a safer journey, to be able to resist fraudulent promises or offers by people who would potentially traffic them, and in general to be able to understand and access their rights. This was really a way of accessing alternative sources of information, allowing people not to be dependent on those providing migrant smuggling services or on potential traffickers. So, for example, a young Syrian man who we interviewed in Germany spoke about how, I must say, I was alone during this journey, but luckily I was connected to people on Facebook at every stage of the trip. I wrote to them, I described to them where I was, and I asked them what to do and which route to take. So talking to people on Facebook about the journey allowed him to know which routes to take and to keep himself safer. Accessing information on a mobile phone was also particularly important for children and young people who were on the move. An 18-year-old Afghan man who we interviewed, he had traveled from Afghanistan to Europe while he was still a child. And he spoke of when he tried to enter an EU country from Turkey, how the worst was not the abuse and that they took everything from me, but that when I got back to Turkey, I didn't have a mobile phone and I wasn't able to call the smuggler and I couldn't ask for help. So it was very basic for him. He could remain resilient to trafficking and abuse just because he had his mobile phone. When the mobile phone was gone, he lost that access. A final case I just wanted to share with you that's very interesting. An interviewee for our research working at an NGO in North Macedonia spoke about a case at the border between Greece and North Macedonia. A woman who was in a truck being smuggled from Greece to other parts of Europe. She was following the route on her phone using her GPS, and she noticed that the truck that they were in was supposed to be driving to a ferry to go from Greece to Italy, but she noticed that instead of that they were at the land border between Greece and Macedonia. So she started making noise, knocking on the truck, and eventually it was intercepted by the border officials, and the people in the truck were able to get assistance rather than being taken along a route and potentially trafficked. My question then, finally, for any of the panelists who would be interested in responding is, when we look at all these cases, we're looking at something quite basic, which is access to technology. We don't need to necessarily, in these cases, develop apps or develop new websites. We need to make sure that people themselves have access to information, have access to a mobile phone, a GPS device, and so on. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for, first of all, making us aware of your new research. We may not have the time in order to enable the panel to respond, unfortunately. We still have one more intervention and then a wrap-up. Our final intervention is from a representative from the Council of the Baltic Sea States. You have the floor.
I think a lot of the issues we were preparing to take up has already been commented upon, so it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So given that question then, I'll be open to the panel if they wanted to respond very briefly, as we only have really just a few minutes on the question of access to technology. Andrew, would you like to go first? You have the floor.
Thank you for your research, and I think you're spot on in that access is critical. But I think that, reflecting on Tony's presentation in terms of the level of mobile technology that is available, whether it's a smartphone or not, it is exponentially increasing across the globe. So I think, in some ways, it's not something that we need to worry about. What we do need to worry about is, I would come back to Ambassador Richmond's points, that if we do use technology, it's based on needs, it's simple, we can prove that it works, we complete that feedback loop by talking with survivors and victims as to how they've used it, how it helped, how it moved things forward. And we also use it when we're reflecting engagement with law enforcement, government, general public in how they use the technology. So I think we always have to operate from an informed position. We have to fail forward and fail quickly so that we get to the solutions that are proven to work. And then we move forward based on evidence and data. Otherwise, we're wasting our time, our energy, and our money.
Thank you, Andrew. And before our coffee break in a couple of minutes, I just want to try and summarize some of those key recommendations from both our panelists and I think also from the floor. The first is that I think most of our panelists and several representatives from the floor were talking about strategy and international cooperation, and particularly that the impact that technology has can be amplified when we start connecting some of our data sets and intelligence and our ways of working. And I think this seems to be a core aspect of the message from today's panel. Something else that was mentioned is through scale. We talked about scale before, but we saw an example from Robert of a relatively small non-profit developing a technology that was able to connect directly with potential exploiters, many thousands of potential exploiters. And this is a disruption to the market that makes human trafficking work. And he said that what happens if we were able to enable this through many other countries and many other languages? And I think this is a strong recommendation for this type of technology. We also heard, I guess, some caution about the use of technology. First of all, it's not a silver bullet. And as I mentioned before, it's not just developed by technologists. And we heard people today talk about the way their technology was developed, including engaging with survivors. And I think these are success factors which we should take heed. I think those are the main recommendations that have been drawn out for today. I'd like to thank you all, including the floor, for contributing to today's panel. And just before we go to coffee, please, if we could give a warm round of applause to the panelists and others. Thank you.